You must have heard about the petrodollar. It's a combination of two words, petroleum and dollars. Global oil trade takes place using the US dollar. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency, as well as a global benchmark of sorts. That's why forex reserves of most countries are maintained in US dollars, since the dollar is the world's reserve and benchmark currency. Crude oil transactions are done using it. That gives the United States a lot of power over global trade and financial transactions. Countries now increasingly view the USA's dollar hegemony as a threat. Washington can weaponize this hegemony to hurt any country like it did when it froze hundreds of billions of dollars held by Russia as reserves in the US. So what is the world doing about the petrodollar system? How do countries intend to end the domination of the dollar, and should the US be worried? Let's tackle the last question first. Yes, the US needs to be very worried. The petrodollar system has not been challenged in decades. Before we get to that, how did the US dollar become so powerful in the first place? Saudi Arabia has traded its oil exclusively using the US dollar since 1974. That was the year Riyadh signed a deal with the United States to use only the dollar for oil trade in exchange for solid security guarantees. This marks the birth of the petrodollar. This further strengthened the dollar's status as a reserve currency. Today, the dollar's tight grip on global trade and its status as the world's reserve currency is being viewed with increasing suspicion by a host of countries. This has led to talk of dedollarization. This is not just a dangerous concept, but a dangerous idea for any political leader to have. The United States has gone to war to protect its dollar hegemony. All the way from the Gulf War in the 1990s, the brutal ouster of Saddam Hussein's regime in Iraq, the absolute obliteration of Gaddafi in Libya, to the 8-year-long war with the Assad regime in Syria, all these regimes had one thing in common: they dared to challenge the USA's petrodollar hegemony and paid a heavy price for it. But this time the challenge the US faces is not from some Arab nation. The challenge is coming from the second largest economy in the world. China's ambitions go beyond just being the most dominant economy. It wants to replace the United States as the leader of a new world order. You see, last week was something straight out of USA's worst nightmares. China. She flew into Riyadh in a pump of state visit intended to boost Beijing's ties with West Asian countries. Things got interesting when Xi Jinping told Gulf Arab leaders on Friday that China would work to buy oil and gas using the Chinese yuan. The Chinese president also said that his country will, and I quote, make full use of the Shanghai Petroleum and National Gas Exchange as a platform to carry out yuan settlement of oil and gas trade. China will continue to import a large amount of crude oil from the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, expand imports of liquefied natural gas, strengthen the engineering services in oil and gas upstream development, and the cooperation in storage, transportation and refining. China is Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade worth $87.3 billion in 2021. In fact, it's the world's largest importer of crude, and most of its supplies come from Saudi Arabia. China purchases around 18% of all its oil from Saudi Arabia. In the first 10 months of this year itself, China bought oil worth $55.52 billion from Saudi Arabia. That's a large volume. Imagine that transaction not being done using dollars. The yuan being used for oil trade between China and Saudi Arabia will greatly short the Chinese currency's value and stature as not just a national currency, but one which can be used to settle trade globally. Meanwhile, Russia and China have been increasing the use of domestic currencies in mutual settlements of trade transactions. Many Russian firms, mainly dealing in energy, have begun issuing unnominated bonds, and several banks are offering deposits in the Chinese currency. India has also taken steps to work out a repairable trade mechanism for its energy purchases from Russia, which has emerged as India's top oil supplier. When seen together, these are all steps that countries are taking to decouple from the USA's greenback currency. Do you think dedollarization will be achieved anytime soon? Let us know in the comments.